This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
Let's introduce our guests today, and each of them bring a different perspective to the table when it comes to emergency planning. We'll start with Dr. Allison Williman from Oxford Community Schools. Allison, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Dr. Allison Williman. I'm the Executive Director of School Safety, Security, and Student Services for Oxford Community Schools in Oxford, Michigan. I'm an educator by trade and came into school safety after experiencing a shooting myself 11 years ago. And I now serve as the chair for the ZeroNow Safety Cohort for school administrators, as well as the Vice President of the National Council of School Safety Directors.
Awesome. We're so glad you're here and very involved with ZeroNow and NCSSD. So amazing work. And I'm glad that everyone started posting. If you can also introduce yourselves in the chat, the participants, just put who you are, your organization, and if there's anything you want to ask the panelists, please hit the Q&A button, and we'll get to those during that. So, Dr. Lisa Dolev, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, welcome. This is your first time on the program.
Yeah. So I'm Lisa Dolev, and I'm here as the founder of the Center for Applied Technologies for School Security, CATS 2. In my background, I've been more than 25 years really hardcore in the counterterrorism, soft target defense tech space, a bit differently. And in my day job, I run a AI-based tech company. So yeah, about a couple of years ago, I founded CATS 2. Just being a professional in this space and, with what's going on and being a contributor, everyone needs to stand up and do something. This was our way of standing up and doing something to provide technologies across the U.S. Really for this specific cause, and in a way that there aren't financial limitations to schools accessing technology.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today. And last but not least, of course, Chief Daniel Dusseau, former chief at Northern Virginia Community College. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Chief.
Hello, everybody. Dan Dusseau. I've been in the safety security world for about 40 years now. That just occurred to me. Come March, it'll be 40 years. I guess that makes me really old. So I started off doing safety and security in retail, and then ended up in police department, a large urban police department, and did 21 years there, and went through a lot of different positions, learned a lot, and retired from there and went to work in a school as a chief of police at a large college, and also had emergency management planning. And a couple years ago, retired from that, and now I do a business, a side hustle as I call it. I do safety and security consulting for schools and churches and businesses and some police training.
Awesome. You've been a ZeroNow advisor from the very first day as well. So,
yep.
Add that to the list of things. Well, Chief, while you're live, so let's dive right into this. When we hear developing an effective emergency response plan or emergency plan, what exactly does effective mean, Chief?
So, to me, effective is practicality. It's not just about how long the document is or you in compliance. Is it actually going to work? And especially, is it going to work when people are under stress? Do the people there, the teacher, the administrators, the staff members, know how to do things and do them without looking through a binder?
Well, and you mentioned the binder, and Allison, is the quality of a plan determined by the number of pages, or how do you define an effective plan?
It's not one that sits on your shelf. It can be as long or as short as you need it to be. In fact, like here in Michigan, Governor Whitner just signed House Bill 4141 and Senate Bill 495, and part of it requires it's cell phone usage in schools, but part of it requires that cell phone usage is included in emergency situations. It has to be in our EOP now. And so that's one more thing. So some of it, what does the law require? What does your school safety organization say? But if it's going to be a dense document that just goes and sits on the shelf, it's useless. How are we using it throughout the year? How are we working with administrators, staff members to be able to help them know, you're not going to think in a fire. I got to grab my binder. You got to know what to do in the fire.
And Chief, when you were in the higher education level, was the plan created by your emergency management team? Were you part of that process? Who was part of that process to determine what to do in the event of an emergency?
So it's a great question. So initially, when I went there, there was six different campuses and six different plants. Although it was the same organization. Some of them were 6 pages, some were 60. And I really don't think anybody knew what was in them. They had designated different people on different campuses to write them, but nobody had done, I'll call it quality control. And so we had to redo the thing and essentially template out a little bit. So they didn't go too far in some angles and not enough in others. And it was about not just templating it from the organizational hierarchy, but also getting the people on the ground who do that to say, okay, what do you do at this moment? Let's talk that through in a practical way we can write into this document. Because you want to make sure you capture the information, and you don't want to commit somebody to say they're going to do something when they don't really do that.
Right.
And I think
Allison.
something else that's important is that it's a living document. Yes, boards have to approve it. You have to submit it for state law and all of the other requirements, but it is a living, breathing document that you should be updating. And I think the best example I have of that is when I was living in Texas of February 2021, we had a pretty big winter storm for South Texas, which shut us down for a week because there would be snow, it would melt, then it would freeze, more snow would come on top of it, and then it would keep freezing. Well, we didn't have a winter storm plan in our EOP because when you think about the FEMA hazard index and all of that stuff, I mean, it's a couple of inches and we're good at most. This was legitimate snow. And so then after that, we had to accommodate how do we plan for that in the event that it happens? And so just keeping in mind that once it goes to the board, that doesn't mean that's it. Staff changes happen throughout the year. So we're constantly having to update charts and make sure that the right people are at the table all the time.
Speaking of table, Allison, to piggyback off of that, we've talked about tabletop exercises, right? So when you have your plan and you look at the different scenarios, is that something that you do typically at Oxford?
Yes. And we have different degrees of it. We have an administrative team meeting, also known as like your principal team meetings, but we also have like transportation and nutrition and things like that. So I like to do a short little one that will engage everyone that's at the table, where if I have my core EOP team at each school and I'm meeting with them, I'm going to do a more extensive tabletop exercise. And we do full out reunification drills with our district reunification team and really hinging on our campus incident commander and operations section chief and campus reunification leader. Although the district team's really going to do a lot of it, we want them there to know, because best laid plans, there's always someone absent. There's always someone that isn't able to do the job the day of, and 100% respect that person. And so just really making sure everyone understands whether it's a short little 5-minute one or it's a full out extensive exercise.
No, Lisa, what role does technology have in planning, and what is it something that supports humans, or what role does technology have in the whole emergency planning process?
I think technology, and especially the way it's been evolving in these past couple of months, has a huge role in planning. So the first thing to remember is that I think you can never have technology take over what humans need to do. There's a reasons that humans and technology work together, because neither one of them is perfect. Everyone makes a mistake for some reason or another. Humans for their own reasons of being human, and technologies for whatever. They're not connected to a database, a tower is out, whatever it is that happens. So they need to be, complementary. But I think when it comes to the planning side of it, artificial intelligence, AI, and these models that are out there in the past months have made just so much progress that you could go and literally, with the correct and detailed prompts, get a plan that suits your specific school by telling it to go to all of the types of documents and using the best practices in the US, using things that other schools are using, telling you where they're getting those sources from, and then running that plan and specifying it to your school too. If it's rural, is it city? Do you have streets? that emergency plan itself, what's going to be happening in those few moments, what's suitable for your school, what's not suitable for your school. And then when you do that, and you have all of that, which really literally takes seconds now in this day and age, then you never do that without having your human expert, because a human expert is somebody who's been around the block, and there is no replacement for the experience that professionals have, what they've seen across the years that no computer can have. So I think that combination is really helps. So you don't have to wait for like months and processes to put a plan together. You can literally get that done in seconds if you do that correctly. Yeah,
So,
huge
so
role.
yes, no, exactly. So, on that note, when we talk about technology and plans and everything, what are Chief? What are some of the biggest misconceptions that school leaders have about emergency planning?
Wow. So, I don't know if it's properly calling it a misconception is the right thing, but what comes to mind for me is writing of the emergency plan. It's usually done under some kind of pressure, whether it's accreditation or it's a regulatory. But the writing of the plan is not the end; it's just the beginning. So there's usually a big breath. Okay, we're done. Thank God. Let's move on. That's just the beginning. And if the people don't know what's in it, you haven't finished. And then you got to actually, you're never finished, quite frankly.
Well, I mean, what I've heard so many times, over the years is, and kind of where we started from is that, we have the most comprehensive emergency response plan. It's, 300 pages. It's very, comprehensive, but there's different trains of thought as far as, having a very brief, actionable plan that's cross hazards. Like, how specific do you need to get?
Yeah. So I think you have to look at your environment, right? Who's involved, and if you have multiple, for like what I'm in my situation, multiple campuses that may not have been the same environments, do all things apply? And there might be things in the document that don't necessarily apply to people in certain positions. So are there ways to make sure they understand what they have? I tell you a very simple thing we did that in hindsight, think it was very effective is we took like our top six emergencies and we broke those down into like three actionable items. Now that's way from getting into the really what needs to happen here, but we made posters out of it. And that became our constant talking points, just to keep going back to what the issues were. So people can get so bogged down into the minutia of each individual item that they just say, I'll just wait to be told what to do. And we certainly can't have that.
So, Allison, please, I know because you mentioned that at Oxford you do have a very comprehensive plan for very specific scenarios. Would you mind describing that?
Yeah, so we account, there's a template here in Michigan. So we of course have to start with that because anything that's required by law. And then the same when I lived in Texas, the Texas School Safety Center had great annexes and appendices as well. But moving from that, like, what do your teachers need to know? Because if you were to hand them a document like that, they don't need in there. So we call them our yellow flip charts because it's a hard plastic case. But even more than that, like we have with our badges, you're issued a little plastic card and we are a district that uses a standard response protocol. So on that, we have the five pieces of the standard response protocol. So bare bones, like that's your cheat sheet. Then in your classroom, you have the yellow flip chart, but then the larger one is more reserved for like your campus incident commander, your district staff, your first responders who are gathering together as part of our district safety committee, and the ones that are really digging in to help us then be able to implement any of those things in an emergency.
So what's interesting, so my father was U.S. Customs at the U.S. Canadian border, and he would get the phone call at 3 a.m. If there's a bomb threat at the Peace Bridge at the U.S. Canadian border, and so then he'd have to under the bed, grab his emergency response plan. Okay, we have a bomb threat here, and then start the whole process, starting the phone tree, notifying notifying Canadian Customs, notifying FBI, notifying Buffalo PD, notifying. And the amazing thing with technology today is you could take those actions in your emergency response plan and have them automated, right? Have that whole workflow automated. So he would just have to, at this point in time, he just wake up and press the Peace Bridge bomb threat button on his phone and automate that entire tree. Lisa, would you mind talking about the role of technology and automated workflows when it comes to taking your static emergency response plans and making them actionable?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, like I said before, there are a couple of things that technologies will do faster and better than humans, and that technology is available to us today. So there's no reason in the world why not to use that. Always have a backup in case it doesn't work. But things like processes, like what you were talking about, even an emergency, where that emergency came from. There are things that we can report as human beings. You can use technologies where there are sensors where there aren't human beings around, and those sensors can pick up things, be that if it's reported by a cell phone or if it's picked up by a camera. Automation of where things are coming from are now available. And then the decision-making process under fire, right? That is, the decision-making is very different under fire than it is when you're not under fire. And so sometimes the decision processes can be automated if you have the right information. And obviously the distribution lists like communications. So there are a lot of types of processes that if they're repeatable can be taken care of by technology. There's a lot of sensing modalities that can be taken care of by technology. And frankly should, and I think they should be part of that planning from day one, so that that takes away from the human aspect of having to remember everything when you can't really remember, right?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so how do you, remember what to do? Like Allison, at your district, right? You have quite a very extensive planning process, and the actual plan is pretty detailed. How do you make that actionable when there is a specific incident that occurs? How do you refresh what to do? How does that whole process work so it is actionable when something bad happens?
So part of it is keeping it at the forefront of everyone. Yes, I will say this as an educator. I am an instructional leader first and all of those things, but the reality is my job has shifted. So it's that constant talk. Even those short, like I said, those short little scenarios that we do are just multiple choice, always thinking safety is the forefront. Are you walking by doors and checking them? Are we pushing them and pulling them as we walk by? Just making that part of who we are. Are we looking around us all the time to see if there's a visitor that shouldn't be there? Or like, I don't have my badge on at the moment. I took it off for this, but if I get up and walk out and someone didn't know who I was, are we comfortable enough to approach someone with that? But beyond that, it's developing a relationship with their local first responders. I have said more than once, my SROs are the gold standard, and they're incredible humans and they're great. But part of that is they're willing to learn education and they're willing to sit and learn what it's like in schools just as much as I'm willing to sit and learn from them in law enforcement. And I would say the best source of learning that I've had through any of my time in school safety has been the local emergency manager of what does that really look like? And that started when I was in Texas and now to even here, knowing that I can call my emergency managers at any point for questions or help, or they're right there in the trenches helping. We run a safety group together, and we're doing little workshops. And so they're willing to dig in and do the work with everyone. And I think that's the biggest piece right there, is everyone coming together, because at the end of the day, we want everyone to go home. And there's no way we can do that without knowing what the either side is doing and what the expectations are.
So you have an emergency manager at your district. So who takes the lead in developing the plan and updating the plan on a regular basis? Who's responsible for that?
So I'm part of a group. So the paperwork falls on me at the end of the day, but it's not ever done in isolation. It's done as part of the district safety committee and working with each campus and their ICS chart, because what changes need to be made. Or we have a developmental kindergarten to second grade campus, which is going to look a little different in an emergency situation than our virtual academy or even our high school. So really sitting down and working with the team. I was a secondary educator and administrator. So the DK, the developmental kindergarten to second grade, that's a whole other world for me. And so knowing that, and I think it's bad. I had a superintendent who once said the smartest person in the room is the room. And it's looking at, there's no one person that's going to know. I'm responsible for the paperwork at the end of the day. I have to submit it to the state. I have to take it and present it to the board, but I am not the keeper of knowledge. And so the more we can bring people with us, the easier it is to implement.
No, absolutely. Chief Dusseau, we talk about the different types of scenarios. Probably the one scenario that people think of most when you think of emergency response is the active shooter scenario. It's obviously it's a high impact, the lower probability events. But how do you prepare for that without creating fear on your campus?
Yeah. So, I have a saying I use that safety is a feeling, not a fact. And what I mean by that is that you have to look at the individual culture and location you are involved in, what you're going to do. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to keeping it simple, but empowering people to act, that making them feel like they're not helpless and they're not just in there's nothing that they can do, that they have options, whatever that might be. We talk about options in active shooters, but there's options in any emergency and in any disaster. And so them having an understanding of it and talking to them and teaching it in a way that is not too policey or emergency or however we tend to do in our industry, certainly brings it down to a point people go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. I can do things. I don't have to sit back and wait for the cavalry to show up. I have things I can do. And I think the empowering of the folks, in my experience, has been one of the biggest things, to see that light bulb go off and people go, oh, okay, I get this.
Lisa.
Yeah, I was going to say that this empowering point is a critical area where technology also can help. So technology can help empower in making right decisions and understanding situations that you can't really, on your own. So that's a very important thing. So for instance, those first few, seconds and minutes that are so critical, they're so critical to life and death. There isn't really easy access to information of what's going on, but you can leverage technologies again, like the cameras and the sensors and the panic buttons and the communication protocols, all of those to, within a fraction of a second, put in front of people what is a more realistic situation, and that's enabled to empower them to do something under that emergency where you're kind of blind and hopeless without that, and really waiting, several minutes for other people to, to come around or to see the situation, or between the calls and the 911. So I think, that I like that empowerment word, because that is something that technology does allow, right, to help people make these decisions and act better.
Well, exactly. And the thing is that technology, we talked about automating workflows, notifying people, summoning law enforcement, all these things. It's very, 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 very powerful, because any technology just augments a human's ability to do whatever they need to do more efficiently or effectively. Now, Dr. Williman, I was just at the AASA conference last week, and we had a conversation with a number of superintendents in one of our sessions. And the topic came up. So this is an interesting dynamic. I'm wondering how you would address this, or advice that you would give. One of the concerns is, like, let's say a panic button, for example, the fear of initiating like a lockdown. Like, what happens if it was a false alarm? What if it really wasn't a gun, or it wasn't an actual threat, but you just locked down the school? Parents are obviously going to be concerned, because maybe a child experienced trauma because you took this action. You assume that there was a bad situation, but at the end of the day, it wasn't. How do you and just to share some additional feedback on that, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. Part of having a communications plan, like Chief mentioned, well in advance with the community, like, hey, this is what we're doing, And we're going to, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to be sure that we take whatever actions necessary. But it's like we were calling it the hot potato syndrome. Like, I don't want to, you press a button, I'm not going to press a button. Or if there's another thing, whether it's picking up the phone to initiate a lockdown or emergency response. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Allison.
Well, I think, of course, you treat it like it's an emergency until you confirm that it's not. And that's difficult. We do have a system in our district, and it has been tripped accidentally. So part of what we do when that happens is we go and meet with that staff member, and not in you messed up, you're wrong, how dare you, I'm going to write you up right now, but how can I get better to prevent you from doing that again? And part of what happened when we had one last year was it had been a little bit since there had been a drill, because Michigan, it's cold, and it's been pretty cold, like this year especially, it's been pretty cold. So there is a little bit of time we have in between our drills, and the teacher just needed reteaching. And so it was such a good conversation that what it really brought about was, all right, when teachers come back from summer, let's sit and do one of those drills and activate whatever that is, put it in drill mode, whatever your product is. And then anytime there's a break, that's a quick faculty meeting. All right, everyone, we're going to sit and activate this in drill mode. So just so we can get used to the system again, and then use that as a teaching tool. Just like with our students, we wouldn't just expect them to remember everything, and we can't expect that with our staff. And so really taking that time to have conversations. Of course, you want to address the safety issues at that time, but in the aftermath, let's have a conversation and let's reteach too, because you may not have understood what you were doing, whether it's the cards and you got to press at a certain time, or it's an app and you got to press and slide, or whatever the things are, making sure everyone feels comfortable with it. And I think that goes back to a lot of what Lisa was saying too, is technology is great, but we need to make sure the human element's comfortable with it as well.
100%, Allison, 100%. Chief, please.
So Allison said something that reminded me of some things I've seen. So if we have somebody that makes a mistake and we discipline them or we embarrass them, what's human nature? Next time, they may not say anything. And therefore, and so they're going against what we're trying to teach them, right? If you see something, say something, or any of these things. And one of the things I've seen, quite honestly, a lot of places, and it's not just schools. I do churches and businesses too, but it's tough for those in charge to let go of authority, to give the authority to sound the alarm to somebody else. There are so many emergency plans out there that say, if this occurs, then this person will be notified, then somebody else gets notified, then ultimately there's a third person or somebody that's going to send out the notification or the alerts. Well, by the time it reaches through that, you're 10, 15 minutes or longer into that emergency, and the whole thing is falling apart. And so it's a very difficult thing to give up. In where I worked at the college, it was that situation. It took me 3 days to send an email. 3 days. I had to get authorities and things to break down that whole thing eventually to the point where dispatchers could send out alerts to lock down without even me knowing about it. But it took the training and the understanding of management all the way up. This is what we're going to do under these circumstances and why. And they had to learn that, okay, if it happens, they're doing this with the best interest in mind.
Exactly, and this is an intangible cultural thing, right? And culture with parents and the community. Allison, you may recall one of our safety cohort discussions with superintendents. One of the members talked about one of the lessons that he learned was to notify parents in the community if you are taking any sort of action in the school, like a lockdown or like that. Let them know immediately, like, hey, more information will follow, rather than waiting, 30 minutes, 45 minutes until you have all the information, because you want to make sure that you're conveying all the confirmed information right away, for fear of being, criticized by parents. Like, what are you doing here? And it's just one of those things that I hope we can, as parents, as a parent, that we can, be a little bit more understanding and say, hey, listen, we let's err on the side of caution than the side of perfection. Allison.
And I think that's a really difficult place to be, because social media is what it is, and it's a game of telephone. And it really is the more we can get out the who, what, when, where, how, as much as we can at that point, with more to follow, the better. And so again, that's a great way to tap into your emergency management. We have like a public information officer within the emergency management office who we partnered with to make templates. So it's not, let's hurry up and craft the email. It's let's look at the template, see what we can put out, and then we can give more information. Because it's a really difficult place to be, and you want to be able to do that. And I always say, I'm not the one to craft those messages. I am going to go into the danger, and I'll give you the who, what, when, where, how, and you can help make it pretty. Even though I was an English teacher, that's just not I'm not the creative writer in this, but that's that partnership that you have, and really just not expecting any one person to be the keeper of the knowledge, and just, again, leaning into the group that you have to be able to do as much pre-work so that when it's time, we're not trying to look for, where's that template? Where did I put it? Let me grab the binder. Like, you should just know where to go, Control F if you need to, find it, and it's ready.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point, Allison, one that I completely forgot about, but that is, talk about having templates and everything, and kind of Lisa tying into, a discussion on the technology side of things. I mean, ideally, because, everyone has an emergency communication system today, you pre-script all of your holding messages, right? That initial message for everything, alien attack, zombie apocalypse, severe weather, whatever that is, you can pre-script all of that, sit in the room with your public information officer or your communications director and craft all of those messages, right? And you might have different audiences for the different messages, but that's a great point, Allison. Like, but having all of those messages in play, preloaded, ready to go. So if there is a zombie apocalypse or whatever that is, you hit the zombie apocalypse holding message. Notifications go out to the community, to parents, social media, website, whatever. Hey, we're aware of the situation. More information will follow, but at least having that stuff, because you don't want to do that under duress. And that is part of like making your emergency response plan actionable, right? That's the whole thing is, okay, yep, we got this stuff. Awesome. You don't want to be thinking about that when the stuff is happening. Lisa.
I was just going to add a layer to that. Aside from having the kind of those pre-baked messages that are ready and who goes what to when, you can also automate those messages. When a certain event happens, who goes to what? So you don't have a person sitting there and deciding, okay, my teachers need to get this, my students need to get this, my parents need to get this. That just automatically, if this is the event that's been declared, immediately everything goes to the right people, and somebody doesn't have to sit there and even decide that where that goes, right?
And so y'all know that we ZeroNow released a position paper on foundational school physical security, and the two core areas are doors are locked, but communications, having a communication system, having even like a PA system that works. I mean, we'd be surprised how many schools don't, but the fundamental things. So we're over halfway through here. There's a lot of questions. And if we don't get through all the questions, we'll post them in the NCSSD community, which ZeroNow is a member. And I put my glasses on here since getting old here. Okay, Nicole asks, how can we approach the idea of bringing up changes or suggestions to an already set in stone emergency plan for schools? You already have a set in stone emergency plan for schools. What advice would you suggest to bring up those ideas? So if you have new ideas, I mean, Allison, you've got a team at your school. What if there are changes that somebody wants to bring up? Is it a formal process? Is it informal? How do you handle that?
Well, I'm lucky enough to be a small enough district where I meet with every campus team monthly, at least. They know that they can call me, but it is part of that. So we had like the whole like Narcan and all of that came up. So we're going to discuss it. Why? What's the purpose? What does it look like? Let's talk to our fire chief to see if that's needed in our community. What does that look like? Let's take it to the district safety committee. And so it's not just one person's like, oh, I have a really good idea. It really does go through multiple layers of things. And I'm not saying every decision is that way. We don't consult everyone when we get a new AED, for example, but the placement of it, we're going to work with the cardiac team on that campus to make sure it's accessible for where it's going to be. And I think that's part of the biggest thing, is just being open. And it's really hard because a lot of things in education are, this is the way it's going to be, but it's that embracing the EOP as a living document and constantly wanting to get better. I know in NCSSD, with the conversation, I know Jason posted some great things that I downloaded, and I'm going to see how I can incorporate it into mine. And you're never finished. The moment you're done learning, and then you become extinct. But I was surprised you asked me to be on this panel, because I was excited to listen and learn, and I've already taken notes today. And so it's just that idea. I know not everyone feels that way, but especially in education. And I know there was another question about like the ICS language. It is trying to bring some of that emergency management language into a school setting. And much like with our students, we want to use formal vocabulary. We want to be able to show them like, oh, here's the FEMA hazard index. I didn't just pick that we're more likely to get tornadoes. Here's a legitimate source for it, and this is why. And the more we can include people in that conversation, we're not just saying, I'm the safety person, I know everything, because I don't. And I'm not going to pretend to. And so it's that partnership we need.
No, absolutely. And you made such a good point. And that really was the whole point. The whole point of forming Zero Now and then NCSSD is to have that community of folks that are on this journey to safer schools, right? We're all going through this journey together. And there are people that have been to different places that experience different things. There are the tools that help you in certain aspects, but that's it. And yeah, if you already know everything, then there's no need to be here. So Chief, okay, some of the common pitfalls when it comes to emergency planning that you've experienced?
One of the big ones, there's a couple that come to mind, but one of the big ones is over promising in the plan, right? So there's this plan that we're writing, and we're putting in the details about what's going to happen, who's going to do what. But specifically, like things such as, and I just did an institution, they in there said they're going to do fire drills. I forget what the was, but like of every building every month or something ridiculous. And they were going to do tornado drills, and they were going to do all these things, and they didn't do them. But it's in the plan. And so there's a tendency, I think, sometimes to say we're going to do these things without really thinking through the practicality of it. You want to say what you do, but you need to do what you say. And if in the long run, if you've laid that out in a plan and you said we're going to do these things and you didn't do those things, you could be in some hot water if things really go bad, liability and in the press and other places. Um, we touched on this briefly. Another one's unclear decision authority. And I think the plans certainly help lay that out. But going back to a point I was talking about earlier, letting go of authority, if people are unclear of the decision authority, there's huge hesitation in the first moments. Who can actually initiate the plan, right? Where do we go on this? If I need permission from different people to do different things, we're probably going to fail. Another one that comes to mind, quite frankly, is, and this is from my experience being a first responder, is assuming that your plans are going to align with the first responders showing up. Now, it all depends, of course, on the community, the size of the smaller towns tend to know their first responders and things. But you can have a fantastic plan, and you may have had it reviewed by the fire chief and the police chief or your SRO or all the above, and they all looked at it and said, this is great. They may not be there when that happens. They may have retired. They may have transferred. There may be mutual aid in effect where, say for a fire department, they came from another jurisdiction, or police officers or the FBI and everybody else is showing up. If you have a shooter, they have a rigid plan. So if your plan is dependent on alignment of your internal procedures, look at it again from a different perspective. Flip it over and say, okay, are we still going to be able to do what we need to do if they are doing their part? Because quite frankly, when they show up, they're going to do their thing. With life safety coming first. And then the last one, I just had a conversation today about this one. I have a colleague who's a retired Secret Service agent, and he was telling me about they used to do trainings in New York City just prior to 9/11. And in the building they were in, building number seven, was it? That which is one of the ones that got hit or that fell. They were evacuating some of the Secret Service members, and they got down to the first floor, and there was a whole lot of folks that were just standing in the lobby. And they were standing in the lobby because during their practice drills, that's what they did. They never left the building. So they did exactly the same thing as they did during practice. So if you're shortcutting your training and you're not following it through, under stress, people tend to react back to what they've trained. So be careful.
No, great points there, Dan. Take a couple of questions that came from registration. We have about 15 minutes. Let's see here. This is great. Well, and Allison, if you want to take this one, in fact, we should probably post some of these in the NCSSD community. Where can you find examples or models of plans? Is there like a template that you could just download and throw together?
It depends on the state. The two states that I've worked extensively in for emergency operation plans, Michigan and Texas, there are templates. The Texas School Safety Center, even if you do not live in Texas, is a great place to start. They have a lot of education there. They have a lot of, and like I said earlier, annexes and appendices to be able to help guide you. But of course, you always want to look at what your law says, what's in your board policies. It's a great example. Please look at National Council of School Safety Directors. We're having those discussions. And I saw there was another question about what to do in a small private school. And there are members within NCSSD who are part of private schools and having the same type of struggles. And although I work for a public school system, the biggest thing you can do is learn as much as you can to be able to come from an educated place. And so really, first look at what your state has, and the worst thing you're going to hear if you ask somebody a question is, no, I'm not going to meet with you. Reach out, find who your school safety center is or your local emergency management, and be able to get help that way. Because if your state doesn't have a template, where do you start? And you may have inherited a great one. You may be someone in human resources or curriculum that got that dumped on your lap. But you always want to, again, go to the experts to see where you can start. And a template's always a great place to go.
On the note of templates, Lisa, we have a question that came in from registrant. What is the best use of AI in developing and implementing a security plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I mentioned this a bit earlier, that these language models, all the various ones, be it ChatGPT or Gemini or, Grok or what, each ones are a little bit different. But the thing is that they have so improved that if you give them the correct prompts and you tell them, I am a school in this particular district, in this particular state, here is my size, here's my number of kids, here are restrictions I have, here are political nuisances that we have, here are, just give them that detail. And then you prompt and say, please review all of the national resources of school plans. Please review all of my state and local plans. Please find the relevant templates from the various organizations. And based on those, create that for me. And if you put that kind of detailed prompting in at the level that these models are working right now, it is astonishing that within seconds what you can generate. And you also put into that prompt, because you say, show me and point me to what are the references that you just made. What is that document? Where is it? And who authorized that, right? And so these are things that honestly can now be done really within seconds. The things you do want to be careful with is from a safety kind of perspective. If you, for instance, want to upload what your school looks like, you should not upload your direct map. Take pencil drawing, make something that's similar to it, not your exact school. Because if you're not using a paid version, what you put in gets used for training. So you would want to use a paid version, and they're not very expensive. And nowadays, in many of them, you can also create projects. So you can open a project folder, and in that project folder, if you don't want them to go looking for these templates themselves, you can also put the various templates that you have and just say, read through these thousands of documents. read through the different experiences, go to the news and to the analysis of what happened afterwards to see, did these things kind of work or no? Please create for me 2 plans. One of them, my formal big plan that I need for everyone, and please also make one for me that is no more than like 10 points. What do I need to do in the first seconds? What do my people need to do in the first seconds? And, and then what happens afterwards? That is the power at the fingertip of every single person here today to do. And then, like I said, once you have that, never, ever, ever implement any of them without going back to your professionals and your experts and saying, this is what it came up with. Is this correct from your experience? Is this the right thing? Because not all of those models have like enough memory. Sometimes, they might skip on something. They might miss a beat on something, just like people. But that literally is a power tool, can be used right now, this very second. I actually ran one last night as a test on it. And while you're doing it, you can even watch and it'll tell you, I am now searching this place. I'm searching this database. I'm searching this document. I'm searching this news thing. And I'm thinking, and here's my conclusion. So,
No, great.
yeah, big time.
Great insights. I mean, it is a tool that is there, and especially for compiling information. Allison, one of the things that you kind of touched upon earlier, part of the path to safer schools is starting with a safety team, then assessing your vulnerabilities. What role does your vulnerability, your risk assessment, what role does that play in your emergency planning process for EOP?
I think that's another piece to that puzzle. You want to be able to, again, like we're using in my district, the PASS tool, because they updated their checklist and they push that out. So we're partnering with our local emergency management to go through that with our administrators, and then working with maintenance and facilities, because if there are things that need to be addressed, physical security and all of that, we don't want to wait until the next time it's summer or we're going to look at this plan or that plan. And so using that then as that discussion point as we have meetings is, are there any gaps that we're missing? What can we use to grow from there? And taking that information, not just on a yearly basis, but we also participate in the beginning of the year. We call them fire walks. We walk with our fire marshals through all of our buildings and maintenance facility, the director of maintenance of facilities, myself, principals, some of our security team members as well, walk with them, because we're not just looking at it as building assessments, but also fire code and anything else. We want to welcome these people into our buildings so that they're not only there when there's an emergency as well.
Chief, I'm going to direct this one to you. Emily asked, and because I know you work with Christian schools and churches, schools, public schools across the board, but any advice for a small private Christian school where the attitude from the administration has been, we're too small, nothing is going to happen here? And we know that has been complacency. And Dr. Eberly asked a similar question: how do you deal with the fear of complacency? How do you deal with the fact that we're not going to have any sort of emergencies here?
Yeah, this is a real tough hurdle. And I'll be honest with you, it's not just small schools like that, even some larger schools still. And truthfully, colleges and universities are required under federal law to do things because of that same issue. The whole Clery Act, familiar with that. That's why that came into play, among other things. So I would say, okay, why is it that reacting that way? Be my thought. If I'm going to deal with a principal or pastor or whoever it is, and so why are they feeling this way? And a lot of times it's been my experience that they're feeling that way because they don't think it's actually, there's going to be a loss of control. They think we're overreacting. They were selling fear, etc. So if there's a way to turn that around and say, okay, so they're involved, but you're feeling like you're solving a problem for them, and I don't know how to do this until I have that conversation with that person. But giving them the solutions and baby stepping them through that. If you try to force the whole thing on them in one fell swoop. I also, my particular church has a school attached to it, which I offer advice all the time. I don't have children there. So I have the power to suggest. And what I have found is I plant little seeds. I plant little seeds all the time. And then I find that some of those come to fruition and sprout up. And next thing I know, the pastor or the principal said, hey, guess what? They're telling me what they did, like it was their idea. And I'm like, fantastic. Let's run with this. And might have some suggestions. Um, but if there's a more pressing issue that from that bear that's it's a little more in their face without being disrespectful, saying, okay, this is why we need to do this. Um, until people are scared, it's my experience, until people are scared, they don't get off the mark and start doing things. I don't believe in selling fear though. So finding that gap in there would make them feel safe. And for me and my experience with this one particular school, it wasn't until a similar school had a similar incident that they all of a sudden thought, oh, we're just as vulnerable. And complacency, I, you know, I remember going through fire drill after fire drill and when I was a kid and I never knew if it was real or not. But what I did know is I was outside. And if the fire was inside, I didn't know. I was just being a kid. Complacency, as long as the people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, personally, I'm not too upset about it. Now, if they don't think it's real, but they're still going outside and they're still doing the things, and we're still doing it on a timely basis. If they're ignoring me though, and they're staying in their classroom during the fire drill, that's the time I'm gonna get upset and start throwing hammering people.
No, great stuff. And just let the folks know that on May 19th, our conversation is about securing private and charter schools. So we'll go a little bit more depth with that. But you're right, it is across the board. I mean, I think it's just human nature, you just don't think that that you're going to have any sort of situation. I mean, like any sort of emergency. I mean, like here in the DC area, we had a massive ice storm. There was like 3 inches of ice in the driveway. Couldn't get the car out. Like, will never happen here. We're in Northern Virginia, but that is so. All right, go. Did you want to jump in, please?
Yeah, I was going to say, just simple questions without inundating the person that you're trying to influence. Simple questions in a one-on-one one time. Hey, what would you expect me to do if this occurred? If we had an intruder, or kind of walk through the conversation, see what their mind is at. You don't have to go straight to the main active shooter, or if suddenly this was occurring, what would you expect my role to be? What do you think your role is? I just need to make sure I understand it. And that can sometimes get people thinking, oh, I have no clue. And maybe that can get you down that road.
That's it. I mean, that's the whole thing, is like looking, like just talking through all the things, looking at all the different scenarios. Tabletopping, like we talked about with Allison,
That's what it is.
is absolutely critical. So you have uh better mindset when something does happen, to be able to respond with confidence, right? And that's the ultimate goal. And so we have just enough time to hear some final thoughts from our guests today. So Lisa, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your final thoughts, words of wisdom for our audience today, attendees.
Okay, well, since I'm here representing the technology side, I would say that to always pay attention to the human technology ratio of who's deciding what and who plans what. And it's very, very different in under emergency, who takes more control in that situation where humans are less actionable. So you're going to have a heavier weight on technology for that than you would under normal circumstances. So really think through and map that out between how you use your human decision capability and your technological capabilities, and for that specific situation, which is just very, very different under stress.
No, no, and that's the thing, is just to keep reframing the fact that technology are tools for humans, right? That's no matter what kind of technology it is, and it could be a skill, it could be emergency communications. So no, great stuff. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Allison, final thoughts for our participants.
I think one of the biggest things is not to make a decision in isolation, with the exception of calling 911. And that is what I stress to everyone, because I've been in education long enough that there was a time I had to ask permission if I was going to call that. And there are plenty of us that have been around for a while that was normal. And so there's always time to make sure you're making the right choice, with the exception of if you think 911 needs to be called, call them. But really relying on your team, because it's impossible for any one person to have all the answers, but together we can help everyone.
No, absolutely appreciate that. Yeah, that's the thing that we talked about, making sure with confidence and knowing that it's better to be safe than sorry. I mean, it's really, Chief, your final thoughts, sir.
The goal isn't better documents, it's better performance under pressure. So compliance, which drives a lot of this, as we talked about early on, checks a box, but preparedness, that changes our outcomes.
And could not have been a better setup for us to remind folks our next conversation is in March. We're already in March. Wow. About executing your emergency response plan. So you have your emergency plan. Now, what about training, executing? When there is an incident, how do you handle things, and what's the best way to approach that? So that will be, when is that date? If somebody knows what it is. It's March 17th. March 17th. I should know this stuff here. So we are completely out of time, but all this stuff is very critical, and so we appreciate your time, all three of you, Lisa, Dan, and Allison. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your perspectives with our participants. Once again, we're on the same journey here to safer schools, and your experiences and insights will help. There were far more questions that we had than we could answer, so we're gonna post those in the NCSSD community within the half hour. And so Lisa and Dan and Allison, if you wouldn't mind just going in there and commenting on those, just to wrap those questions up. And we'll see you all in March 17th. And thank you, everybody. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Lisa. Take care.
Thanks.